Welcome back, everybody. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our next session, Best in Show, Human-Centered Agility for Mission. Our next group of speakers will investigate and talk about how to take on behavior-centric approaches to data protection that will help agencies proactively address threats and boost mission vitality along the way. We got a great, panel and speakers here. So it's my pleasure to welcome them. We have James Saunders, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Small Business Administration. James Porter, or Jim Porter, the Chief Information Officer at the Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC. Sorry about that, Jim. And Rob Campbell, Director of Enterprise Data Protection at Force Point. Rob, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
That's great. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, to our, I think, final session for the morning, if I'm correct, titled Human-Centered Agility. And I think that was a really good summary of what we're going to be talking about. So I'm happy to be here. I kind of head up a focal point in our government group focused on exactly that. How do we apply human behavior analytics to be agile in an overall security architecture? And I'm happy to be joined by Jim and James today. And I thought I'd just let them do just a quick hello to the audience and maybe just a quick self-introduction here to get things kicked off. Jim, you want to take that first?
Sure. Yeah. Good morning. It's still morning here. I've been at MCC now coming up on about a year. I know you guys can see my bio. But before that, I spent close to 10 years at U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and other parts of DHS. And I'm learning how to adapt to a totally different culture here at MCC. And I'm happy to share with you my thoughts.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jim. James, I know you had a little connectivity issue and you'll be dialed in today. Assuming you can still hear us, do you want to do a quick hello and just a quick intro?
Absolutely. I can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect.
My name is James Saunders. As my bio stated, I am the Chief Security Officer here at the United States Small Business Administration. I've actually been at this location for 2 years. Prior to the CISO role, I was actually the Chief Security Architect. Starting in February, I became a CISO. So my entire experience at CISO has been dealing with the COVID-19 and CARES Act implementation. So it's been a lot of fun, a lot of great challenging work, and we're pushing through it. Before that, I worked in various different locations as a contractor, supporting multiple agencies, including SEC, SSA, CMS, and a few other places. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell.
That's great. Thanks. Thanks very much. I guess be careful what you ask for, right? Promotion right before COVID. No, that's great.
It's been fun.
Yeah. Okay. So, the session title, Human-Centered Agility, I think we're really trying to position and frame up this discussion in the context of, what has historically been an approach around data security under zero trust. And then how that, whole environment is migrating or security framework is migrating to more of an adaptive trust approach. And if you keep up with Gartner, you will have certainly heard a buzzword recently called CARTA, which is a great summary of this whole concept. And CARTA basically is the continuous adaptive risk and trust assessment of humans or interaction of the people in the given agency. And so it's that idea of adaptive trust that we really want to kind of compare and contrast to zero trust. Just very quickly, if you look at the history of zero trust, there's nothing new there. Certainly we've been talking about that for a number of years. The concept was pretty simple, right? The concept was, let's neck down what any individual identity in the agency has access to by way of resources or sensitive data. So that if that individual were compromised or something were happened to that particular account, they don't have access to everything in the environment. And it's a great idea. It's a great start towards, data security. But it really leaves the door open to a whole discussion around, what happens when something bad happens, right? The idea of a compromised account, we're dealing with that all day long now with the increase in phishing attacks. And when that identity starts showing risk of potentially being compromised, how do we really adapt to that? And I think that's really what we wanted to get into a little bit today in terms of legacy approaches to zero trust and where we're really trying to migrate to in terms of this whole concept of adaptive trust. Once we see something happening where we can identify risk in the environment, how do we lock down on that particular identity and really protect data? So anyway, let me just start off with a couple questions, and we'll get the discussion going. Jim, I think it'd be kind of good just to get some perspective out on the traditional zero trust real quick. I know OMB last year in 2019 kind of put out a mandate that every agency has got to put together an ICAM governance structure and basically a point of contact and ahead of that initiative. I'd love to just hear 2 minutes or so of kind of your approach to the legacy zero trust and whether that's really been a big focal point for you.
Well, in terms of ICAM, we are well established in ICAM and governance and everything that represents. We tend to do very well in our audits, independent audits, which we have annually, like a lot of other agencies. The one challenge for us is we are in the foreign aid assistance business, and our model is a little bit unique in that we need to partner with foreign governments on a regular basis. So the traditional zero trust model is not perfect for what we're trying to do. And a big way that we address it is really through risk. And we work very closely with our chief risk officer in identifying what are the risks as an agency we're willing to accept. And cybersecurity is really kind of embedded in our overall risk strategy. And so, as you're saying around CARTA, that's more of a model that we're adopting, which is we're looking at things through that risk-based lens. And that allows us to have an overall better experience for any of our foreign government partners, but also people internal to the agency. We really don't want to have people kind of figuring out ways to get around things. And it's part of the behavior that I think is really also embedded with this. We want to make sure people are well educated in how to treat data, that they come to us if they have problems. And as you said, Rob, phishing is another huge problem. We want our staff to feel very comfortable calling up our cybersecurity hotline and mentioning of an incident. So for us, it's behavioral, it's assessment of risk, and it's really adapting our business toward it. I will say one other thing. We are also known as being very transparent in publishing our data. So we don't think of our data the way maybe some other intel agencies do, and that's where kind of our risk comes into it. We publish most of our data to the public, and so that changes kind of our posture significantly when it comes to zero trust.
No, that's great. I appreciate that very much. James, what about your perspective on adaptive trust and behavior analytics? Have you been experimenting with those types of technologies and that type of adaptive risk framework in your overall security architecture?
Certainly. Our roadmap, our history with it kind of began back in 2016, 2017, when we first started moving into the cloud. So for us, we had to figure out how to manage identities that exist both on-prem as well in the cloud, so we can make better risk-based decisions. So pretty much the identity and users are a critical piece of our current state architecture, as well as our future state target state architecture, which includes zero trust. So what we do with identity is we kind of grab that data. We know what the user is doing, where the user is logging from, what the user context around that user and what they're trying to access. And we use that to generally create different risk scores that is fed into different mechanisms, such as our VPN. Since if you logged in a couple days ago from the same location, your machine's up to date and your identity is solid, maybe you don't need to put you through the additional multi-factor authentication steps. Or maybe you're showing more risk indicators. Maybe we're going to put you through, instead of 2 factors, 3 factors. Or maybe you're showing higher risk, we're just going to block you until we have a conversation with you. So that's some of the stuff we're doing. We're shifting and trying to take some of this technology from the technology conversation. We got the fancy, shiny tools to how do we actually implement risk-based decisions with those tools. So that's our concept and how we build it back into our current state and future state cybersecurity architecture.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think we certainly spend a lot of time, and I personally have spent a number of years looking at behavior analytics and how we can introduce those kinds of technologies into these types of security frameworks. One of the other areas we spend a lot of time looking at is in the whole context of zero trust or Carta. It's all about protecting the data, and what we're talking about in the traditional zero trust approach is kind of governing access to that data so that we can begin to lock it down. Are you looking at technologies either on-prem or in the cloud for, what happens when things go bad, actually, locking down data from leaving the network, or, some of the traditional data loss protection type approaches? Are you working with any of those technologies?
Yes. So again, for us, a lot of our tools are integrated together, do security orchestration automation. So we tie everything together so that the DLP system talks to our identity system. So we know if someone's accessing data they should not, and if they're trying to email it or push out the other mechanisms, we see it and can then respond to it. So let's say we identify something bad happening with my identity, for example. I know that my security operations team would say, hey, James, you're not supposed to have access to the data. We're locking down your account until we have a conversation. In a few weeks, we're transitioning that to something that's a little bit more automated, where we saw this happen. This is on a higher end of that risk spectrum, automatically shut down. So that's what we're doing with the technologies. We want to weave them together so that when we're talking zero trust and even further down the line, implementing some of the Carter ideas, it's natively built into our tool set, into our processes, because they're deeply intertwined. We can't move too far forward without the people piece being in place, the technology piece being in place, and the procedures being in place.
Right. No, I think that's really interesting. Having been involved with behavior analytics for a long time, I think we've all matured over the last 3 or 4 years with some of these ideas. To the point of what you're talking about, I think is really at the edge of what we can do with all of these kind of capabilities. I think if you go back 2 or 3 years ago, behavior analytics was a great way to get visibility and insight into risk in the environment. And those systems were typically passive, right? So they would put risk up on a dashboard and somebody in a SOC could take action on it. I think the step forward from there is just as you described, right? How do we automate taking that action around that? And I think one of the things it'd be fun to talk a little bit about is how you have evolved, or you and Jim around these concepts of kind of trusting the tools and trusting the environment and trusting these risk scores to actually take action. Do you care to comment on that?
Certainly, and then I'll pass it to Jim for sure. Yeah, so in short, we do a lot of baking, a lot of what-if analysis. So before we turn on the automatic responses, we already know and trust that the tools that we're using will produce repeatable and consistent results. The last thing you want is for your tools to be all over the map. Now you're impacting your business mission, or the mission of the business. So for me, it's to give time to bake it in, to test it out, make sure it's good, and then start from the lower risk activities up to the medium, up to then the higher risk, because as you go up that spectrum, the more and more impact you potentially will have on your business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll say we have a fairly robust behavior analytics program where if we see users doing something odd that doesn't match their profile or the spectrum of their normal behavior, it'll alert our information assurance team, and they will actually reach out and ask questions. If they're pulling down a lot of data all of a sudden, or they're hopping from one system to the next. And for me, it's really back to the education. That when people are aware that we are watching odd behavior and keeping track of it, people are going to reach out to us more to say, this is something I want to do. and they'll make sure that they're following within the guidelines of what our security office policies are in place. So it's getting back to not only just the behavior analytics, not people sitting in the back room kind of looking at, oh, isn't this odd, but actually the outreach is just as important, and then the education as a follow-up.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I have a lot of conversations with a lot of organizations, and I think it's that communication that is so key. At the end of the day, for the majority of the folks, what you're trying to do is protect their identity. In the event of an account takeover or account compromise, you want to recognize that just as much as they want to recognize that to prevent anything bad from happening based on their persona when they're not really doing anything. So I think that it's just we're doing this for the better of the organization, and we're doing it for the better of your individual persona too, which is an important thing to communicate.
Yeah.
It's interesting the way you just described looking at risk, identifying it in the SOC, and then kind of taking some action on it. And I think where Jim is trying to lean into is to almost orchestrate some automatic action to be taken within the security tools. And I know that we spend a lot of time here at ForcePoint looking at that and working on that automation and flexibility to take a high risk score, publish it out to the infrastructure, and then have different components in the infrastructure take action. And I think that's where there's just a tremendous amount of efficiency that can be gained as we begin to perfect that whole idea. Begin to trust the risk scores, be able to trust that we can publish them, consume them in other components of the architecture, and take action. So I think maybe Jim, back to you. Do you see getting that far anytime soon, or is that maybe a step down the road?
I think it's a step. I don't want to be in the position of hoarding data. I think that from a user's perspective, we want to inform people in an automated way. We can inform someone's like, hey, your behavior is not right. Is this intentional or is this not intentional? Maybe automating that outreach. I think that'd be a fabulous thing to do. But I want to make sure we're not like just holding the data and then and not taking action on it right away when we can. Yeah,
no, that's great. So another topic I was really anxious to talk with both of you about is the changes that are in the environment today with COVID and the remote workforce, and how that has maybe altered what you were working on 3 or 4 months ago in regard to this, right? In regard to risk and the kind of activity and where you're getting user interaction data from to drive these risk models. Maybe you could comment a little bit on that. What's the impact to you with remote workforce? James, I don't know. Do you want to start with that?
Certainly. I'll say it this way. So SBA was already on the path for remote work. I can speak for my security team. We've been remote enabled for at least the last 2 years. So when we got the notice that we were going to move to maximum telework, it was not a huge shift to transform security operations and policy compliance into a fully telework enabled workforce. Now getting the rest of the agency there took just a teeny bit more effort, and only because we had different use cases that we needed to address. But in total, since we were able to primarily connect all of our endpoints back into the cloud for management, all the identities already existed in the cloud, we had 2 risk scores already there. So we could bind them, and then we used that for determining, hey, does this machine, is it a higher risk, is it a lower risk? High risk, all right, MFA, phone call from the SOC, let's figure out what's going on. Lower risk, let's go and let it connect normally as it already had. So for us, it wasn't too much of a shift for what we were doing. It was just kind of an enforcement, honestly, and encouragement of we were on the right path, and now it's time for us to actually show off that we did it. We were able to do it.
No, that's great. Jim, how about you? What's the COVID impact been like for you?
Very similar to what James was saying. I mean, we've been ready for telework. We have we're headquartered in DC, but we have a lot of travel with our staff going overseas. So it's really kind of embedded in our culture. which is good. And we have all the equipment and technology to support it. The one interesting challenge that I had within the first week, everyone I think was getting frustrated because we have Skype in place, which unfortunately is something that we are upgrading right now. But we knew it was stable, so we wanted to keep Skype for now as we're moving to Teams. And also we have WebEx. And a lot of people were very excited because we've been using Zoom happy hours and Zoom this, Zoom that, and Zoom makes it very easy to create a conference. It's a nice grid view, and everyone wanted to shift technologies right away. Then you start seeing all the articles about Zoom and the problems in the behavior where you can log in without a password, and people have been Zoom bombing, and so luckily I have a good relationship with the CEO and the leadership team to say, look, let's time out on all the enthusiasm around switching platforms here. Let's just stabilize and do what we do really well. And we'll assess this as we're going down, and I think that's really kind of saved us, is really kind of getting that top cover on keeping the continuity of operations going.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I've had conversations with a number of our customers about this transition, and it's interesting. Some of them are seeing very noticeable shifts in SOC operations, mainly from the type of use cases as James was alluding to, the type of alerts that the different. It's funny that the different use cases or policies that are stressed in the remote work environment, with the rapid shift of the majority of folks working in things like Office 365 as opposed to Outlook Online or on the network. It's that kind of shift from network data protection to cloud data protection that I think in some of our clients has really stressed the system. And I was kind of curious whether you have seen any of that in your environment. Just different types of alerts, potentially overload for the SOC operations team, and just how you're dealing with that. Maybe have you seen any of that type of thing, James?
Not necessarily major shifts. So throughout the pandemic and our response to it, we've been doing a lot of building. Kind of step back a little bit. I've been fascinated with the concept of data gravity for the last 10 or so years. And the way I see it is that from a security perspective, we need to protect where the data is. So for us, we already was having a steady march towards moving data into the cloud. Yet when we were tasked with providing more support for the small business community, we were moving even faster into the cloud. So all the protections that we had in place or planned to put in place, we quickly enabled. So some of the things, such as DLP in the cloud, making sure if we're using VMs, it has the DLP technology on it. If we're using PaaS or SaaS technologies, that it connects back to our CASBs so that we have the visibility on where the data is going, how it's going, and should it be going. So that's the main approach there. As far as everything else, we always generally had insight into technologies such as O365, where we can respond to phishing attacks, spam, even business email compromises. We haven't seen one of those in years. And that kind of ties back to some of the automation conversations we were having earlier, where, again, we know the context, we know your user behavior. If you're based in California, I should not expect to see traffic for you trying to authenticate from, Maine. It's just things that are natively built in. We can block certain things before it even becomes an incident, before it becomes a problem. So that's been our experience with it so far.
Yeah, no, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. Jim, any other comment there, or?
I'm trying to think. You're going to laugh, but that, of course, everyone working from home, we have a fairly sizable legal office, and they all wanted to make sure they had their printers working. So, we had to put out guidance on how do you print documents from home. What we really didn't want people to do is forwarding documents to their personal accounts and printing them out from their Yahoo or Gmail, because then we really kind of lost hold of the data. So for us, it's really important to make sure that people can feel very successful on their own equipment and on the equipment that we provided, and that they could plug in peripherals and devices as needed. And we weren't going to leave them in a lurch with a hard no policy on something. So So we've had to bend the rules a little bit, but I think overall it's been successful.
Right. No, I think we're seeing that across the board too, right? The BYOD, bring your own device. When people are at home, they'd love to be able to have the flexibility to work with a BYOD device. And I just think the controls that need to be in place around that are, very different than obviously if you've got visibility down to the endpoint, that's great. And if you don't, then you need a different approach. And the idea of using CASB and proxy to break into those kind of communication channels, and then the different use cases that you just talked about, the home printer, all of those become, just huge challenges to be able to maintain efficiency for the overall workforce without kind of bringing everything down to it needs, letting everyone get done what they need to get done, but then obviously taking into account these new, potential data loss channels that are very sensitive.
Yeah. And we've made some adjustments to make sure that people feel very comfortable with what they have, and that we're comfortable with what they're connecting to the machines.
Yeah, it's funny. We use this term here, weaponizing these different data protection technologies, and by using behavior analytics, so that if we can keep 99% of the workforce moving forward without a lot of, implication from a data protection perspective or data controls perspective, and use behavior analytics to kind of pinpoint aggressive action on locking down, or even, as James said, potentially taking somebody out of the access management pool for any applications, something to that extreme for a trusted high risk score. I think that's what we're seeing as the real potential to fully leverage behavior analytics in an overall adaptive risk and trust type architecture. We're spending a lot of time, trying to understand how we can publish our risk scores out for the components that we work with, and then have them have those same risk scores consumable with other key components in a zero trust or CARTA-based architecture. We've done a lot of work with that, and we're going to continue spending, a lot of time, looking at the ecosystem of other technologies that would be, would be key to your overall ZT or CARTA structure. So we're pretty much out of time. I don't know if we have any questions coming in. I don't see anything we need to address. James or Jim, any other final thoughts or comments here today?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick. Unless you want to go, Jim.
No, go ahead, James.
No worries. Thank you. I just wanted to know, as a general statement to everyone listening, of course, the point of cybersecurity is to protect the mission of the business. Most modern organizations, their business revolves around data. So we need, as security professionals, need to be extremely careful from being a shop of no, always saying no. We need to start partnering with our partners to help design solutions that enable them to work efficiently and for us to feel comfortable so that we can sleep at night and make sure everything's secure. So behavior is a key component moving forward, because you can no longer just trust, zero trust in essence. Just network controls, just DLP. You gotta now look at your users. So that's my final parting words. Users are important. Watch their behavior so that you can push your mission forward, which is to secure your environment.
No, that's perfect. Jim, any final thoughts?
No, James, you said it perfectly.
I was going to say you
nailed it. I'll take
the person for our team. I mean, that's exactly how we look at it too. Human-centered activity around all of this data and protecting it is really key now. So, on behalf of ForcePoint and my esteemed colleagues here, Jim and James, I really appreciate your joining us today, and thank you for your time. We'll talk to everyone later.
Thank you.
Thank you.